Imagine you're home alone watching TV, and you hear footsteps coming from the hallway just outside your bedroom. Maybe you hear knocking on all the doors around your house simultaneously. Or maybe you glance at your nanny cam only to see an ominous figure looming over your child's crib. If these sound like the kind of stories that would give you nightmares, then stop watching now. Otherwise, grab a snack, dim the lights, and prepare for a feast of grim and grisly content. I'm your host, Severed Soul. I was 17 years old, babysitting for my sister for the night. It was the night before Halloween, and the air was thick with an unsettling chill that crept through the old house like a ghost. My sister Mia and I spent countless nights exploring the creaks and groans of our family's huge 100-year-old home, but tonight felt different. The house seemed dark and cold, more so than usual, and every whisper of the wind sent shivers down my spine. Mia had gone to bed early, her excitement for Halloween bubbling over, while I stayed up to finish a horror movie marathon. The clock ticked insistently in the background, and as the night deepened, the shadows in the corners began to stretch and twist, creating a dance of terror all around me. As the credits rolled on my last film, I heard something, a soft, familiar voice calling my name from the attic. "Nancy, come up here please, I need you." It was Mia's voice, sweet and coaxing. But something in her tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. What was she even doing up there? With heightened anxiety after watching scary films, my heart raced as I considered the possibility of her playing a trick on me. Still, it was unlike her to be so serious, so earnest. I glanced at the clock. 1:30 a.m. "Mia?" I called out hesitantly. "Are you up there?" "Just come up, Nancy. I really need you," she insisted, her voice rising with urgency. A chill ran down my spine. The attic had always been a place of mystery. It was very large, and it was filled with old family treasures and forgotten memories. I had always felt an unshakable dread about it, a sense that something was lurking just beyond the stacks of boxes and cobwebs. But the desperation in Mia's voice pulled at my heartstrings. What should I do? I stood up, my legs feeling heavy as I made my way toward the attic door at the end of the hallway. The old wooden steps creaked beneath my weight as I climbed up, each step echoing in the silence. I reached the door. The metal knob felt cold and unwelcoming in my palm. "Mia, are you really up there?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes, please, I'm scared," she replied, her voice now tinged with a slight quiver that sent a wave of panic through me. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. A dark void met my gaze as I stepped inside. I flicked on the light, and the bulb flickered hesitantly before illuminating the cramped space filled with boxes, old furniture, and dust. "Mia?" I called out again, but there was no reply. As I scanned the room, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. The air was heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin prickle. I stepped further inside, the floorboards creaking beneath me, and called out again. "Mia, where are you?" "Over here," she called back, her voice echoing from the far corner of the attic, where the light barely reached. My heart raced as I approached, each step feeling like a descent into darkness. "I'm so glad you're here," she said softly, but something in her voice felt off, almost distorted. When I reached the corner, I was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. There, in the shadows, stood a figure that resembled Mia, but her face was obscured by darkness. "Mia?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Is that really you?" "Of course it's me," the figure replied, but the voice was wrong, too smooth, too inviting, lacking the familiar warmth of my sister. "I've been waiting for you. Come closer." At that moment I heard a shuffling sound come from behind me. I heard a voice that alerted all of my senses at once. Every hair on my body stood on end. "Nancy, what are you doing up here? Who are you talking to?" I turned to see Mia at the entrance of the attic, yawning and rubbing her eyes. I hesitated, fear gripping my heart like a vice. "Mia," I said with a trembling voice. "But if you're... then who—" I turned once again to face the dark corner of the attic, which was now empty. With an undertone of urgency in my voice, I told Mia to go back downstairs immediately. I followed closely behind as quickly as I could without hesitation. Without looking back, I slammed the door to the attic shut behind me. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I could hear her shrieks of anger and frustration. I ran down the hallway as fast as I could, my heart racing. I instructed Mia to go to my room. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I leaned against it, gasping for breath, my mind racing. I could still hear her voice echoing in my head, taunting me. "You can't hide forever. I'll always be here." As the minutes ticked by, I felt the weight of silence settle around me. I wanted to believe it was over, that I had escaped whatever darkness was pretending to be my sister. Every part of me wanted to believe that I had been imagining things, but deep down, I knew the truth. Something sinister was lurking in the shadows of our attic, and I was petrified that it would continue to call out to me. That night, I lay wide awake, listening for any sound, fearing the whispers that might come creeping back. What was it? A mimic? A doppelganger? Whatever it was, I knew I had to keep my sister safe. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly dawn, and in the quiet of the morning, I thought I heard it again, soft and sweet. "I'll be waiting for you. Let me out." I covered my ears, trembling, but even in the safety of my room, I could feel the ominous presence looming over me, waiting for the moment I would let my guard down. Halloween was just around the corner, and as the darkness crept in, I knew I would never truly escape the horror that lurked in the attic. I remember one Halloween when I was younger, probably about 12 or 13. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a spooky glow over our yard, where the trees stood like sentinels. I had always loved this time of year. The crisp air, the rustling leaves, the thrill of Halloween creeping ever closer. But tonight felt different. The shadows seemed deeper, and an unsettling stillness blanketed the house. My dad had gone out early that evening to do some last-minute preparations for our Halloween party. He promised he'd be back soon, but as the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept glancing out the window, towards the garden shed at the end of the yard, its silhouette looming against the night sky. It was old and weathered, the kind of place where strange things could easily hide. Just as I settled down on the couch to watch a scary movie, I glanced again toward the shed and noticed this time that the door was open, swinging back and forth. I walked out into the yard to go and shut the shed door, but as I left the house, I noticed a sound. It was like a deep, rumbling, laughing sound, and it was coming from the shed. I approached with caution, wondering who on earth was in our shed. Then I heard a familiar voice bellow out from the darkness. "Ah, there you are. Come here, buddy. I need you." It was my dad's voice, unmistakable and inviting. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by a strange unease. "Dad?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Is that you?" "Yeah, I'm in the shed. Hurry, please, I need your help," he urged, his tone filled with an urgency that sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated, glancing at my watch. 10:15 p.m. It was late, and the darkness outside felt oppressive. "What are you doing in there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need your help with something important. Just come to the shed," he insisted, the warmth of his voice pulling at my heartstrings. But something felt wrong. My instincts screamed at me to stay put, to ignore his pleas and head straight back to the house. "Just a minute," I shouted, trying to buy time as I wrestled with my fear. Apprehensively, I continued slowly into the darkness. The shed was a shadowy outline against the moonlight, and I could see no sign of movement. "Come on, I don't have much time," he urged again, his voice rising with a hint of desperation. Against my better judgment, I aimed my flashlight towards the shed and made my way to the door. With each step towards the shed, my heart raced, pounding in my chest like a drum. I reached the shed, and the cold air hit me like a slap around the face, wrapping around me like an unwelcome embrace. "Dad?" I called out again as I approached the shed. The door creaked ominously as I reached for the handle, and I hesitated for a second, my mind racing with doubts. "Just open the door, please," his voice came again, now tinged with impatience. I took a deep breath and pulled the door open. The hinges squealed in protest, and the smell of damp wood and rusted tools hit me like a wave. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing the cluttered interior. It was a large shed, filled with old gardening tools, paint cans, and boxes of forgotten things. "Dad?" I called out again, stepping inside. The door swung shut behind me with a soft thud, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Over here," he said, and I followed the sound of his voice deeper into the shed. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. The atmosphere felt heavy, charged with an energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. As I moved closer to the back of the shed, I noticed something strange. The air felt colder, almost frigid, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. "Dad, where are you?" I called again, my voice trembling now. "I'm right here," he replied, but his voice sounded different, echoing oddly, as if it were coming from somewhere far away. I reached the far wall and shone my light around, but there was no sign of him. Panic bubbled in my chest. "Dad, this isn't funny. Where are you?" Suddenly, I noticed a dark figure standing in the corner, partially obscured by the shadows. My heart raced as I took a step back, the beam of my flashlight wavering. "Dad!" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Come closer," the figure urged. As the light illuminated its features, my heart dropped. The face that stared back at me was not my father's. It was a twisted reflection, eyes hollow and mouth curved into a sinister grin. "Who are you?" I screamed, stumbling back towards the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening bang. The figure took a step forward and started speaking in a dialect I couldn't understand. I turned to the door, but it wouldn't budge. The air thickened, and I felt a presence closing in around me, suffocating and overwhelming. "Let me out!" I screamed, banging on the door, panic coursing through my veins. The figure let out a deep, guttural laugh that sounded almost like a growl. It was a chilling sound that echoed in the confined space. Suddenly, the shed was filled with a cold gust of wind swirling around me like a storm. I could hear my dad's voice again, but this time it was different. Deeper, more sinister. "Come join me, son. This is where we belong." Desperation surged through me and I slammed my shoulder against the door, feeling it finally give way. I burst out into the night, the chill of the air hitting me like a wave. I didn't look back as I sprinted across the yard, not stopping until I reached the safety of the house, slamming the door behind me. I leaned against it, gasping for breath, the echoes of that twisted voice ringing in my ears. I could still hear my dad calling me, but now it was a hollow sound, a cruel imitation of the love I had always known. As I sank to the floor, trembling, I knew that whatever had come from that shed had taken my father's voice, his essence, and twisted it into something dark and malevolent. Halloween had always brought a thrill, a playful fear, but this time it had awakened something far worse. Eventually, my dad, my real dad, came home. He walked through the door and greeted me as normal, completely oblivious to the horrors that I had just endured. That night, I lay awake, haunted by the whispers that seemed to linger in the air, waiting for the moment I would let my guard down. The garden shed loomed ominously outside my window, a reminder that some doors should never be opened, and some voices should never be answered. If you enjoyed that story and would like to hear more, then before we move on to the next story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It was a chilly October evening, a few nights before Halloween. It was the kind of night that wraps around you like a cold blanket, reminding you that winter is just around the corner. My baby boy, Oliver, had just drifted off to sleep in his crib, his small chest rising and falling rhythmically. I had always been a bit of a worrywart when it came to him, so after tucking him in, I made sure to check the baby monitor before settling down in the living room. The monitor was a high-tech nanny cam, equipped with night vision and two-way audio. I loved the peace of mind it gave me, allowing me to keep an eye on Oliver while I relaxed on the couch. I poured myself a cup of tea, turned on the television and settled in, occasionally glancing over at the monitor's feed, watching my sweet boy sleep peacefully. As the minutes ticked by, the house settled into a comfortable silence. I found myself lost in my favourite show, but as the night progressed, I couldn't shake a lingering feeling of unease. Maybe it was the spooky atmosphere of Halloween creeping in, but I felt an odd chill in the air. Out of habit, I glanced at the monitor again, and my heart skipped a beat. For a moment, everything seemed normal, but then something caught my eye. A flicker of movement in the corner of the screen. I squinted, leaning closer. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the night vision, but as I watched, the shadows in the room shifted unnaturally. My breath caught in my throat. Maybe it's just my imagination, I whispered to myself, shaking my head. I took a sip of tea, trying to dismiss the feeling of dread creeping over me, but it was hard to shake off when I saw it again, this time unmistakable. Like something straight out of a horror movie, there was a dark figure standing just outside Oliver's crib. I scrambled for the volume dial, my heart racing. "Oliver?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The shadow loomed near him, and I felt a sense of panic clawing at my chest. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding like a war drum. The figure seemed to bend down, its features obscured by the night vision, but I could see its form clearly. A tall, thin silhouette with long limbs. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "What the hell is that?" I muttered, my mind racing. I flipped the audio on, praying to hear my son's soft coos or cries. Instead, all I heard was a low, guttural whisper, too quiet to make out. "Get away from him!" I shouted, my voice breaking as I lunged for the monitor. As if responding to my fear, the figure turns its head towards the camera, and my stomach dropped. Its face was like a twisted, grotesque mask, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. I felt bile rise in my throat as I scrambled for my phone, desperate to call for help, but the screen flickered, the feed distorting as the figure raised a hand towards Oliver. "No!" I screamed, racing down the hallway, my heart pounding in my ears. "Oliver!" I burst into his room, and the sight before me nearly made me faint. The crib was empty. Panic surged through my veins as I looked around the dimly lit room. The soft glow from the monitor was the only light, illuminating the empty crib where my son had been sleeping just moments before. "Oliver!" I cried, my voice echoing in the stillness. Just then, I heard a soft giggle, like a child's laughter echoing from the corner of the room. I turned around and my heart sank. There, in the shadows, was Oliver, standing on his tiny feet looking up at something standing next to him. Something I couldn't see. He was smiling, completely oblivious to the danger surrounding him. "Oliver, come here!" I shouted, rushing towards him. But, as I reached for him, I could feel some kind of unseen force blocking my path, repelling me like an invisible barrier. The air grew cold, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. "Get away from my son!" I yelled, but my voice was lost in the oppressive silence. In this moment, a shadow seemed to manifest once more. It reached out towards Oliver, and I felt like time had frozen. I remembered the stories, the tales of the spirits drawn to children, seeking to steal their innocence. Not a fucking chance would I let that happen. "Oliver!" I screamed again, my voice breaking as I lunged forward. Before I could reach him, the shadow dissipated like a mist, vanishing into thin air. I scooped Oliver into my arms, clutching him tightly to my chest, my heart racing. The room felt heavy, as if the air itself was charged with a dark presence. "What's wrong, Mummy?" Oliver asked, his eyes wide and innocent, seemingly unaware of the terror that had just unfolded. I held him close, tears streaming down my face, desperately scanning the room for any sign of the entity that had threatened him. "Nothing, sweetheart, nothing at all," I whispered, my voice trembling. As I looked around the room, the shadows seemed to retreat, the cold air lifting, but I knew in my heart that the danger was still there, lurking just beyond the edges of my perception. I took Oliver back to the living room, clutching him tightly as I collapsed onto the couch, my mind racing. The monitor still flickered on, the feed showing my baby's empty crib, but now I was terrified to look away. I wrapped my arms around him, whispering reassurances, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had come for him was still watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The rest of the night passed in a blur of anxiety and fear. I kept the lights on, the monitor close, and Oliver nestled in my arms. Halloween was supposed to be a time of fun and fright, but I had unwittingly opened the door to something far more sinister, something that would haunt me long after this night had ended. It was Halloween night, and the air outside was electric with excitement. My friends had all gone out to the big party down the street, but I had opted to stay at home. I wasn't much for crowds, especially on a night when the veil between the living and the dead was said to be at its thinnest. Instead, I planned to binge watch horror movies in the comfort of my living room. The glow of the television filled the room, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. I settled into the couch wrapped in a blanket, a bowl of popcorn resting in my lap. The wind howled outside, whistling through the trees, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The old house creaked and groaned as if it was alive, but I brushed it off as just my imagination running wild. About halfway through the second movie, I could hear a soft knocking. It sounded like it was coming from the front door. I paused the film and listened intently, the sound echoing through the stillness of the house. Presuming it was kids playing trick or treat, I grabbed the large plastic pumpkin I had prepared filled with treats and opened the front door. To my surprise, there was no sign of anyone outside. I called out just in case, but was met with silence, thick and oppressive. I shook my head trying to convince myself it was just the wind blowing against the door knocker, or maybe rubble blowing against the door. I returned to the movie, and all was quiet for about 10 minutes until I heard it again. But this time, the knocking continued, persistent and rhythmic. It was unnerving, and I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. As I walked towards the front door, like the flick of a switch, the knocking at the front door ceased. It had shifted. No longer at the front door, it was now echoing from the back door. A quick glance at the clock showed it was almost midnight. This isn't funny, I muttered to myself, feeling the hairs on my arms stand on end. It can't be trick-or-treaters at this hour. Against my better judgment, I decided to check out the rear of the house. As I approached the door, the knocking persisted, seemingly getting louder and quicker. I reached for the door handle, my heart already beating like a drum in my chest. The very second my hand touched the handle, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a voice. The voice of a child. Trick or treat, followed by a haunting giggle. My heart raced. Who's there? I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. The only response was the sound of my own voice echoing back at me. I opened the back door just a crack, peering out into the darkness. The yard was empty, shadows stretching across the ground like fingers grasping for me. I shivered and closed the door, closing my eyes for a moment to steady myself. When I opened them, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. What happened next was like something straight out of a nightmare. The knocking returned. However, it was now inside the house. The knocking was now coming from the living room door. It sounded frantic, like someone was desperate to get in or out of the living room. Please stop! Leave me alone! I shouted, trying to muster all the courage I could. I marched back to the living room, but as I entered, the knocking shifted again. Now at the front door, then the back door, then the bedroom door down the hall. It was as if something was toying with me, moving around the house just out of sight. With each knock, my heart pounded harder. I felt trapped, like a mouse in a maze. Stop it! I yelled, feeling the weight of fear pressing down on me. I stood in the centre of the living room, breath coming in quick gasps, waiting for the next sound. But then it stopped. Silence enveloped the house, heavy and suffocating. I glanced around, trying to gather my wits. I could hear my heart beating in my ears, and I was about to turn back to the couch when I heard the same soft, childlike giggle coming from the hallway. My stomach dropped. It sounded too innocent. It was sinister, just completely terrifying. I crept towards the hallway, my pulse racing. Hello? I called out, my voice shaky. Is anyone there? No answer came, just the echo of my own words. I reached the end of the hallway where the shadows pulled the thickest. The bathroom door stood ajar, and a flicker of movement caught my eye. "If this is a prank, it's not funny. I'm about to call the police," I shouted, my voice trembling. As I stepped closer, the door creaked open slightly, revealing darkness beyond. I hesitated, but curiosity pushed me forward. I peered inside, but the bathroom was empty. Just as I was about to turn away, I felt a cold breeze waft past me, chilling me to the bone. Suddenly, the knocking started again, more frantic than before. It came from all directions: front door, back door, bedroom door, an overwhelming cacophony that filled my ears. I spun around, panic setting in. "What do you want?" I screamed. But the only response was more laughter, echoing, haunting, and entirely unnatural. In a surge of adrenaline, I bolted back to the living room, my eyes darting around, searching for an escape. I grabbed my phone, ready to call for help, but the screen flickered and died, leaving me in darkness. I was alone, trapped in this nightmare with whatever was tormenting me. The knocking stopped suddenly, and a heavy silence settled over the house. My heart raced as I stood, frozen, just waiting for something to happen. And then, the front door swung open slowly, creaking on its hinges, revealing an empty porch bathed in moonlight. "Trick or treat," the voice came again, this time echoing from multiple directions, a chorus of eerie voices that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't think. Fear took over, and I sprinted for the back door, throwing it open and bursting into the night. I ran across the yard, the chill of the Halloween air biting at my skin. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my neighbour's porch, breathless and trembling. As I turned back to look at my house, the door stood wide open, the shadows dancing in the moonlight. I could still hear the faint echoes of laughter, the knocking fading into the night. I knew that whatever had been in my house was still there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for me to return. That Halloween night changed everything for me. I had always loved the thrill of the season, but now I knew there were things out there, things that knocked on doors and whispered in the dark. And as I stood on that porch, I vowed never to spend another Halloween alone. This happened on Halloween night a few years back. I had experienced a few strange things whilst living here. A door will be open when I swore I closed it. The TV will be on when I swore I'd turned it off, that sort of thing. But nothing that ever really scared me. That was until the night I'm about to tell you about. Me and some friends were renting a house on the cheaper side of town, not too far from our college. I had decided to spend the evening alone, relishing the chance to enjoy my favourite horror movies without any interruptions. My friends had all gone out to parties, but I preferred the cosy solitude of my home, where I could immerse myself in the thrill of the season. The flickering glow of the television cast eerie shadows across the living room as I settled onto the couch, a bowl of popcorn in my lap. The atmosphere felt charged, the wind howling outside, rattling the windows like restless spirits. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was watching me, but the excitement of the night kept me glued to the screen. As the movie reached its climax, I heard a soft scuffling sound echoing from the hallway. I paused the film, my heart racing as I strained to listen. The sound was unmistakable. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, padding along the wooden floor outside my bedroom door. My breath hitched in my throat. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering. "Who's out there?" I was expecting a response from one of my friends. Maybe they had forgotten something or come home early. However, I was greeted with silence, stretching on for what felt like an eternity. I grabbed my phone, the light from the screen providing a small comfort in the darkened room. Taking a deep breath, I stood up, my heart pounding as I moved cautiously towards the hallway. The footsteps had stopped, but the unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach only grew stronger. Maybe it's just the house settling, I thought to myself, trying to rationalise the sounds I had heard. I reached my bedroom door, the wood cool beneath my fingers. With a shaky hand, I pushed it open, the creak of the hinges echoing in the silence. The room was dimly lit, shadows pooling in every corner. I stepped inside, scanning the room for any sign of movement. Everything seemed in place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard it again. Footsteps. This time, right behind me. I whipped around, my heart racing. The door swung gently on its hinges, and I felt an icy draft sweep through the room. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice stronger than I felt. But once again, the only response was silence. Suddenly, I felt a cold breeze brush against my skin, a sensation that sent chills racing down my spine. I turned back toward the bed, and to my horror, the sheets began to pull themselves from the mattress, sliding off as if an invisible hand was tugging at them. I gasped, stumbling backward, my heart hammering in my chest. "Stop it!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty room. But the sheets continued to peel away, and I felt a cold presence enveloping me, wrapping around my shoulders like icy fingers. Panic surged through me, and I turned to flee. But as I turned, the door slammed shut in my face, trapping me inside. "Let me out!" I screamed, pounding on the door. But there was no answer. The air thickened, and I felt the weight of something unfathomable pressing down on me. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, swirling like a storm. "Why are you here?" I cried, my voice breaking. "What do you want?" There was a few seconds of unbearable silence, which were interrupted by 3 horrendously loud bangs on my bedroom door. I could barely breathe, my heart racing as I turned back toward the bed, where the sheets had come to rest on the floor, now pooling like a shroud. I backed onto my bed, crawling back as far as I possibly could. With my back flat against my headboard, I felt like prey being stalked by a bloodthirsty predator. Then, again, 3 deafening bangs on the wall. I couldn't bear it any longer. In a moment of sheer desperation, I charged at the door, throwing my shoulder against it with all my strength. It gave way with a loud crack, and I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. But the air felt different now, charged with something dark and foreboding. I ran down the hallway, my pulse pounding in my ears. As I reached the front door, I glanced back, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. But all I saw was the darkness of my home, the flickering light from the television casting long, eerie shadows. Without thinking, I yanked open the door and bolted outside. The cool night air felt oddly comforting. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my neighbour's porch, panting heavily, my heart racing. The sound of whatever was pounding on my door lingered in my mind, a chilling reminder of what lay within. As I stood there trying to catch my breath, I glanced back at my house. The windows were dark, and the front door hung slightly ajar. I knew I would never return to that house alone again, not after what had happened. It was definitely time to start looking for alternative accommodation. Halloween was supposed to be a night of fun and fright, but I had uncovered something far more sinister. That's all for today. I really hope these stories give you nightmares. If you enjoyed the video, please help me out with the algorithm by clicking the thumbs up and subscribing to the channel for a feast of grim and grisly content. As always, thanks for watching. I'm your host, Severed Soul.